You know, if this were the 4Kids stuff, they would change that to either him pointing a finger or whatever this is. More on that at the end, by the way. Our cold opening this week featured our spotlight characters, a couple of washed-up comedians who needed some cash fast. Well, okay, I kind of feel bad for them as they look like pretty nice guys, so what are they going to do about it? Damn, Jonochi fell in some hard times after he stopped playing children's card games. Remember that for later too. But yeah, they were scoping out the Fujiwara residence waiting for Hazuki to come out. The Ojamajo herself was on her last day of witch prohibition and just had to wait until that night, which was when the queen took away her magic originally. So she headed out where the two men were waiting. Wow, they were extra fast today. Their initial trick, of course, didn't work because this is Hazuki, the brains of this team. She would never fall for an obvious trap. If I push any harder, I think my hand is gonna go straight through my face. Yeah, I've got a lot more to say about this, but I'll save that for a little later. After a couple of scenes to establish that our other two main heroines were here, Hazuki was taken back to the kidnapper's very messy apartment. And of course, Hazuki's first thought upon seeing all of this was, in fact, she was so courteous to her kidnappers that she even helped write her own ransom letter, to which these two morons thanked her. You know, recently, I rewatched Home Alone 1, and I realized the Wet Bandits weren't quite as dumb as I remember they were. Kevin just had too much plot armor. These two? I wonder how they function in normal society. The call turned out to be a wrong number, but Hazuki took this opportunity to trick the kidnapper into calling Doremi, and even provided a script for him that would reveal that she had been kidnapped as well as their address. Now, I would say this was really clever, but that's kind of negated by how she got into this situation in the first place. Maybe you could say her trying to help with her own kidnapping earlier was Hazuki trying to lure the two into a false sense of security, but her inner monologues didn't match up with that theory. In any case, Doremi rushed to the Mohodo to tell Aiko about the situation. Jeez, Doremi, you want some water after that amazing line delivery? Here, just take the whole bottle. The two decided to take matters into their own hands, of course figuring that their magic would be able to solve any of their problems. The first thing they tried was giving in to the ransom by magically counterfeiting 10 million yen, as if this economy wasn't already in the toilet. Doremi also gave it a slightly more successful shot. Well, you could just do the Scrooge McDuck thing and put it all in one bag. Eventually, they decided to just go with the more direct method by impersonating some cops. God, our characters have so many good ideas today. Anyway, Doremi's prowl cosplay ended up alerting the kidnappers, who decided to make a run for it. The Ojamajo followed close behind, and Doremi once again made Dio cry a little by using Zawaldo like it was nothing. It didn't work as the car door was still locked. Thus, Aiko gave it a shot and tried to stop the car, and for some reason it turned it into a Chinese wagon. And this rather random joke was repeated 3 more times, with the kidnappers, for whatever reason, tried to ignore the fact that their vehicle kept on changing. Okay, couple of things. 1, y'all are breaking the rule of 3. You can only really do a variation of the same joke 3 times in a row before it loses its luster, not that this was all that much of a knee slapper to begin with. And 2, Hazuki is wide open in all of these alternate vehicles. You could just cast Zawaldo again and rescue her. You know, I usually really like this kind of goofy comedy, but all of this just kind of lacked at least that little hint of logic to ground it back to reality, and it felt more forced than anything. Anyway, they were unable to save Hazuki by the time they ran out of spheres. The kidnappers and Hazuki set up camp in the forest, where we got some nice moments of pure Stockholm Syndrome. The two revealed that they were a failed comedy troupe named the Papaya Brothers. Their agency eventually dropped them, but then they were offered a deal by a not all shady looking dude who offered to take them in as long as they paid him 10 million yen up front. Yeah, it goes without saying that was probably a total scam. Not that these two would be able to tell. Hazuki pointed out the obvious that even if that agent were for real, the brothers would just repeat the process if their comedy act failed to get over a second time. And you know, having a criminal record might affect things a little. Okay, not so much now I think about it. Anyway, she convinced them to do their act for her, which got a laugh out of her, and to be fair, it was better than some other comedians I could think of. Doremi and Aiko finally caught up with them, but the younger Papaya brother pulled his gun on them, which turned out to be a toy because Japan doesn't have Second Amendment rights. And very understandably, Aiko retaliated by punishing them and...
お嬢ちゃんは誘拐されちゃったんだよ。あの人たち悪い人じゃない。てめえ何のつもりだ。あの人たち悪い人じゃん。ホールドアップっす。
Hazuki, did you not see that guy pull a gun on your friends? Yeah, it turned out to be a toy, but he clearly pulled it with the intent of shooting at them, and yet you want to say they're not bad people? Okay, let's just address the elephant in the room. My biggest problem with this episode is the fact that they're trying to make these kidnappers sympathetic. Look, I get that they want to portray Hazuki as a very understanding and amiable character, and I do agree the brothers don't deserve to die, but there has to be a limit to things. No amount of sympathetic backstory is going to excuse the fact that they kidnapped her for entirely selfish reasons and almost shot at her friends. I usually don't like to bring this up because I think shows like this should be enjoyable for viewers of any age, but let's not forget the target audience of this show was children. So then why is it that this show seems to encourage getting along with kidnappers who in many real-life scenarios will commit life-scarring atrocities to their victims? If anything, this episode should have been a cautionary tale to avoid situations like this, but no, they had to have their goofy fun and even say that these guys are a couple of innocent comedians who wouldn't hurt anyone unless they looked at them funny. This is all just so morally apprehensible to me that I really can't get into this episode. Anyway, the Ojamajo tried to save the idiot, but of course they had run out of spheres. Fortunately, Hazuki managed to restore her magic early because she cried on her pact.
I guess crying does solve your problems after all.
They rescued them, and Majurika and Lala even helped by convincing the brothers that they didn't see any pint-sized witches on brooms. And the episode ended with the not-so-wet bandits dropping Hazuki back off at her home and not getting charged for, let's see, kidnapping and threatening with an imitation firearm. But hey, they're not bad guys, and they even managed to somehow restart their comedy careers. How and why? I don't know, magic or something. Okay, so just this once, out of total curiosity, I decided to check out the magical Doremi episode of this because, well, it's for kids. Of course they're going to change a lot of things. The first thing I noticed, aside from them not including the first few minutes of the episode, was the fact that the elder Papaya brother was voiced by Wayne Grayson, the voice actor of Joey Wheeler. Yeah, in both versions of this episode, this character was voiced by Yuki's comedic blonde sidekick. I think someone at 4Kids realized the voice actor connection, casted him, and even seemed to include an in-joke.
This is my lame-o sidekick, Joey.
Hey! Who you calling sidekick?
But yeah, the biggest change they did to this episode was almost completely removing the kidnapping plot. Instead, the elder Papaya brother was Hazuki, or rather Rian's down-on-his-luck Uncle Mick, who was trying to break it into Hollywood, not stand-up comedy, with his roommate Joey. He was so broke that he couldn't even take his niece to the museum like he promised. This led to her suggesting that he could borrow some money from the shop, but a misunderstanding with Dory led her to mistakenly believe her friend had been kidnapped. Yeah, I said they got rid of most of the kidnapping plot, that part was still intact. They ended up running away from the witches when they mistook the sirens as their landlord calling the cops on them, and from there, the episode mostly played out the same, of course removing the gun scenes, because toy or not, if we're never going to get the Legend of Dratini episode, we're not going to see firearms in a 4Kids show, unless a Growlithe is there to take them down. God, I'm a nerd. Now, while I'll never be a fan of 4Kids' later dubs and business practices, thanks for screwing over Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, I do have to kind of admit I like the English version of this episode a little more. Yes, I usually don't support censorship in any form, but I do also have to kind of admit, I like the idea of Hazuki trying to help a struggling family member much more than her uncharacteristically falling for a very obvious trap. The fact that she later used a very clever plan to get help almost feels like an insult to injury because the creators should know Hazuki is much smarter than this. Yes, she lacks some street smarts, but stranger danger is kind of a universal concept. At least with the uncle scenario, it led into a more reasonable, if a little cliche, misunderstanding plot. And yet, in spite of purposely tricking them, Hazuki still ended up befriending her kidnappers. Yeah, I'm sorry, I can't get over that. And even if I did, I still don't think I could like these two. The Papaya Brothers' failures were mostly the fault of their own hubris, and they will likely only continue to make the same mistakes over and over again. These guys are just a couple of losers who literally can't get their act straight. In fact, in both versions, I don't think I found the humor all that great, as it felt a little too random and forced at times. I think the most laughs I got was just from the insanity of Hazuki in the tank, though even that joke was kind of spoiled, as I said. That said, Hazuki was still a good character, and while I don't approve of her just forgiving the Papaya Brothers, I do appreciate her kindness and understanding. However, that alone can't save an episode that I just cannot get behind. While I still think the Soccer Brothers had a technically worse episode, I think the Papaya Brothers had an episode that I'm more morally against. This was the first episode of writer Atsushi Maekawa, and while Fresh Precure has shown that he can be a great writer, this was just not a good first outing for this series. Hopefully, he'll do much better next time. As usual, after I edit this, I'm going back to work on part 2 of my Symphogear Axis review. I did experience a little production slowdown last week, mostly due to all of that delicious turkey, but I'll still try to get it out for you guys by mid-December. Look forward to it, and until then though, farewell for now my friends, and if you'll excuse me, I have some guests in the next room who are in dire need of some coffee. Busting down all of those doors must be really tiring.